On this Thursday night, the pandemic spawns another crisis. How many Canadians are silently struggling with their mental health?
I was having some pretty dark thoughts. I was having trouble getting out of bed in the morning.
The man who says his cry for help was rejected. Terror in France. 3 people are murdered at a church. Heightened security for America's election.
I am concerned about what happens.
The threats to democracy at the polls and to the people. And another hurricane hammers the Gulf Coast. Plus, one of the strongest typhoons to slam Vietnam.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Robin Gill.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. Lots to get to tonight as we track the spread of COVID-19 in Canada. But we want to begin with another public health crisis that's a consequence of the virus. Across the country, reports of anxiety, depression, and mental health issues are growing. And there's concern not enough is being done to help people who are struggling. This month, the Canadian Mental Health Association surveyed more than 1,500 people. Of those, only 35% say the current public mental health system is meeting the needs of Canadians. Many provinces and the federal government have committed millions to help tackle the issue. But an Ontario man says he was turned away. Our Abigail Bimman has his story.
I was having some pretty dark thoughts. I was having trouble getting out of bed in the morning.
Facing extra pandemic stress, Elliot Hudson knew the warning signs and knew when to ask for help.
And then I discovered Beacon.
His therapist suggested Mind Beacon. The Ontario government has provided it nearly $2 million to offer free virtual therapy during COVID-19. But after completing an intense application he says took him 90 minutes, Hudson was turned away.
Beacon is not equipped to support the challenges of substance abuse, suicide attempts, and more immediate and critical needs of clients.
While Hudson has a complicated history, he wasn't in crisis when he reached out.
It was extremely cold, impersonal, and discouraging, to get an email back from a so-called mental health organization that says, your problems are more than we can handle.
That piece hurts because, of course, mental illness is a lot about feeling separate in the world. And that is certainly, an invitation to feel separate.
Shocked to hear the reply, Hudson's therapist reached out to other clients telling them not to apply, worried about the intense application and form letter rejection.
For some of them, it could actually have been, fatal.
Mind Beacon refused multiple interview requests for this story. In emailed statements, the company says it is not a crisis service and points out that message is on the bottom of its website. Mind Beacon said anyone who's experiencing issues outside, quote, listed capabilities is supported in accessing more appropriate care in their area.
Well, this is the first I've heard about it, but what I can do is promise the people that are having challenges right now. I'll talk to the Minister of Health. I'll follow up with the organization that you've said, and we'll be on it because we are a government that's putting more money into mental health than any time in the past.
A promise from Ontario's Premier, while new data from the Canadian Mental Health Association shows the need is critical.
For many people, the situation has gotten worse. People are feeling more worry, more anxiety, and more stress as the pandemic goes on.
Therapists like Hudson's brace for a tough winter. She's had more calls outside work hours in the last few weeks than the last 5 years combined. Abigail Bimman, Global News, Ottawa.
Now to the coronavirus crisis and the situation across Canada today. There were more than 2,900 new reported cases and more than 40 deaths. Here's the breakdown. New Brunswick had 4 new cases today. There were more than 1,000 in Quebec and more than 900 in Ontario. Manitoba set another daily record today with 193 new infections. Saskatchewan also broke its daily record with 82 cases. Alberta had more than 470 and in BC, more than 230. In Ontario, the number of new daily cases remains stubbornly high, but public health experts say there is some reason for optimism. The spike in infections is starting to slow, and new modeling shows Ontario is shifting away from the worst-case scenario. They warn, though, things can change quickly.
we are still seeing growth. We are still seeing people sick in the hospital. Having said that, what we're illustrating is that there is some slowing of that growth, which is so important because it speaks to the efforts that everybody is making.
There's a cautionary tale for people thinking about taking a risk and attending a large event. A wedding this month in Ontario has now been linked to at least 46 cases. The event took place over 2 days at a banquet hall north of Toronto in Vaughan. Public health officials say about 100 guests were in attendance. Infections from the event have since been detected across southern Ontario. Officials say they're considering potential charges. France is on its highest security alert after a suspected terrorist attack at Notre Dame Basilica in Nice. A man armed with a knife killed 3 people before being captured by police. President Emmanuel Macron arrived on scene and says an extra 4,000 soldiers are being deployed to protect religious sites and schools. As Crystal Goomansingh reports, the attack happened at a time of heightened tension between France and the Muslim world. And a warning, some of the details may be disturbing.
Police gunfire at an iconic cathedral in the south of France. Distressed citizens rushed to Nice's Notre Dame Basilica after hearing that 3 people had been killed in a horrific knife attack. Reports say an elderly woman was beheaded. The suspect now in custody in hospital. French President Emmanuel Macron expressing support for the Catholic parishioners, saying France stands at your side. Islamofascism is how the mayor of Nice described the events, saying France is paying too high of a price. Many are still mourning Samuel Paty. The teacher was beheaded last week in an attack supposedly in retaliation for him showing depictions of the Prophet Muhammad to his class, something considered to be blasphemous to Muslims. Earlier this month, Macron pledged to defend secular values and crack down on what he called Islamist separatism.
Normal, everyday majority of Muslims, as I have said, have nothing to do with these kind of radicals.
Lukman Ahmed says Muslims shouldn't have to point that out, but he feels they must. He says the goal of extremists is to alienate Muslims from the larger community, and it doesn't matter if they live in France or Canada.
Whatever happens in one country does not stay in one country in this age due to social media.
As the sun set in Nice, people of all faiths expressed fear about copycat attacks. The attacker is said to be a 21-year-old Tunisian national who arrived in Europe in September. France's anti-terrorism prosecutor is investigating, as the terror threat in France has now been raised to its highest level. Crystal Goomansingh, Global News, London.
Security is top of mind in the U.S. in the final days before Tuesday's presidential election. Both the threat of violence at the polls and the security of voting itself. There is intense focus on fears of widespread fraud and intimidation, and heightened concerns about cyber attacks. But as Jackson Proskow reports, officials are on high alert.
The security fence is still up outside the White House, left over from a summer of unrest, while the rest of Washington is quickly boarding up, preparing for every possible election outcome on Tuesday. In cities across the U.S., police are getting ready.
Let's just be honest, 50% of the population is not going to be happy.
The security of the vote and of voters are nagging worries. There's concern about armed poll watchers disrupting Election Day. At least 5 states are considered at risk for violence from armed militias, like the one that plotted to kidnap the governor of Michigan.
The department will continue to plan for any type of civil unrest, national civil unrest. We're thinking about larger civil unrest, either stemming from an election result or non-result.
Hi there. Then there are the threats, both foreign and domestic, that could upend the election and its aftermath. Hackers in Georgia have penetrated state election databases. Iran is accused of sending threatening emails to voters using stolen registration data. Disinformation, especially from foreign governments, risks fueling tension.
They're going to be really successful if they can cause people to call into question the validity of the election, the results of the election.
an election in which results could take days to be delivered. 2 battleground states have warned it could take up to 4 days to finish the count.
It's really important for Americans to understand that the delay in the final count is not in any manner, shape, or form evidence of widespread fraud.
It seems likely the majority of Americans will vote in advance of Election Day, either in person or by mail. Any disruptions on November 3rd could have an outsized impact on President Donald Trump's campaign because Republicans are more likely to wait until Election Day to cast their ballots. Robin?
Jackson Proskow in Washington. Thanks, Jackson. For months, President Trump has been urging his loyal supporters to keep an eye on the polls. He's claimed the only way he can lose the election is if the vote is rigged. That's raising fears about how some supporters might react to the results. Fears of violence from right-wing extremist groups are very real, especially in Michigan. It's home to a large number of armed militia groups. And as Jeff Semple reports, they've had a troubling presence in the state for decades.
And you could hear it just echoing through the entire building.
This Michigan state senator was sitting at her desk in the Capitol last spring when she heard the protests outside.
This is about each and every one of you patriots.
The crowds, angry over the pandemic lockdown, chanted, "Let us in." McMorrow then looked up to the gallery to see this heavily armed militia.
If one of them decided to put their finger on a trigger and start firing, we would be sitting ducks in a fishbowl. And they were taunting us.
13 militia members, including several from that protest, were later charged with planning to kidnap the governor.
I am concerned about what happens next.
And some are preparing for the worst.
2020 has been a bumper year for gun sales. Between the months of March and September, Americans purchased more than 15 million firearms. That is nearly twice as many as the same period last year, and nowhere more so than right here in Michigan.
People that are new to firearms, that have no background to it, they are now realizing that they need to protect themselves.
Last year, this Michigan gun store sold 300 handguns. So far this year, they've sold 3,000. Across the state, firearm sales in September tripled.
Freedom being threatened by the things that are going on right now, yeah.
These volunteer militia members, self-styled defenders of the Constitution, have existed in Michigan for decades.
But during the Trump administration overall, we've actually seen what we think is a pretty solid increase in these groups and in their members. President Trump has played into many of their fears.
Michigan was hit hard by the pandemic in the spring, prompting the governor to lock down businesses. In response, Trump tweeted, "Liberate Michigan."
Hey, Governor, let your state open.
At a rally in the state this week, his supporters chanted, "Lock her up," in reference to the governor. Michigan's former Republican governor has heard enough.
He's not brought us together. He's been the divider in chief.
He's switching sides and endorsing Joe Biden.
I don't think we need a president that's actually sort of throwing gas on the fire.
But many Trump supporters are steadfast. This Republican, who joined the protest at the Capitol, says he's counting on the militia to defend him and, if needed, the election.
All of those guns, you see them all and you're also scared of them. That's for your protection.
These protests and a pandemic creating a political pressure cooker and fueling fears that the U.S. is on a collision course with itself. Jeff Semple, Global News, Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Big Brother at the mall. Coming up, the millions of images of shoppers captured without their consent. A major privacy concern to tell you about tonight, involving a dozen shopping malls across the country. Digital images of 5 million shoppers were collected using controversial facial recognition software. It happened without the customers knowing. An investigation by the federal, Alberta, and BC privacy commissioners found cameras embedded in information kiosks at 12 malls, and they gathered information without consent. That, they say, contravened privacy laws. The property management company behind the malls is Cadillac Fairview. The company says it wanted to analyze the age and gender of shoppers, not to identify individuals. Cadillac Fairview says the images were deleted, but investigators found the biometric information from the images was stored in a third-party database. The malls include Toronto's Eaton Centre, Calgary's Chinook Centre, and Pacific Centre in Vancouver. Cadillac Fairview stopped using the facial recognition technology in 2018. More than ever before, technology is at the forefront of America's election, especially as this pandemic plays out. Tonight, social media companies are facing growing scrutiny and pressure to prevent a mountain of confusion and chaos on election night. Rob Malcolm has more.
America's tech giants are bracing for what is expected to be an onslaught of misinformation around Election Day, and stopping the spread is a major challenge.
There is so much false information out there on all social media platforms that it's trying to put out a forest fire with a garden hose.
Social media companies have implemented new measures ahead of the election to guard against false or misleading content.
The companies have come to the conclusion that when it comes to public safety and when it comes to the integrity of the election, they have to draw certain lines.
But where they draw those lines has led to accusations of bias. Twitter's decision to block a controversial New York Post story about Hunter Biden led to a backlash, especially among Republicans.
Thank you very much.
On Wednesday, the CEOs of Facebook, Twitter, and Google got a grilling at the U.S. Senate Commerce Committee.
Mr. Dorsey, who the hell elected you and put you in charge of what the media are allowed to report and what the American people are allowed to hear?
I hear the concerns and acknowledge them, but we want to fix it with more transparency.
It was a contentious hearing meant to focus on a law that protects the ability of tech companies to moderate content.
It's a real difficult situation for these companies because they don't want to be accused of censorship. They don't want to be accused of political bias, but at the same time, they don't want false information leading their members to make bad decisions based on rumors that are simply not true.
Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg says the company looks to be both fair and consistent in its approach.
I'm proud that our company and as well as the others in the industry, I think, have built systems that are very effective at this.
But there are limits to what these companies can do, and in the end, it will be up to individuals to use their own judgment.
I think it's really incumbent upon everyone to think critically about the information they see and to know where to go for validation.
Facebook has put together a war room to spot election-related incidents. Twitter says it will flag and label any post that misrepresents election results. Both platforms have now banned political ads until after the election is decided. Rob Malcolm, Global News, Sacramento.
Still ahead, Hurricane Zeta brings death and destruction to Louisiana. This is the impact of Hurricane Zeta. It destroyed a trailer in New Orleans, sheared the awning off a gas station, and blew a building's wall open. The storm made landfall Wednesday as a Category 2 hurricane, packing winds up to 180 kilometers per hour. At least 5 people have died. Parts of North Carolina and Virginia are expected to see damaging winds tonight. In Vietnam, the worst typhoon to hit the country in 20 years triggered landslides, killing at least 35 people. More than 50 others are missing, and soldiers are frantically trying to hunt for survivors. The typhoon has damaged more than 50,000 homes and left millions without electricity. Heavy rain is expected in the region until Saturday. Up next, the battleground state where a unique senator ditched his Democratic dynasty. The Trump and Biden campaigns are both paying close attention to the crucial battleground, Pennsylvania. And Luzerne County has become something of a poster child for the state's swing districts. It's one of a handful of Democratic strongholds that surprised most pollsters by going red in 2016. Global's Farah Nasser spoke to a Pennsylvania senator about why he left the Democratic Party to sit as an independent.
Meet the Uticheks, a last name that's been synonymous with the Democratic Party in Pennsylvania for a generation.
My father, a Democratic leader here in Luzerne County for over 60 years. That's where my politics was born. That's the foundation of my politics.
But for State Senator John Utichek, 2016 caused a crack in that foundation, which kept growing.
You could put half of Trump supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables.
And when you demonize someone because they go to church on Sunday, because they hunt, because they're pro-Second Amendment, or they're pro-life, and you demonize that person and tell them they don't have value, you're not going to get their vote. I felt I no longer could be a Democrat and represent the voice of those working class families.
Now he just had to tell his elderly, staunchly Democrat father.
He was very proud of my decision, and with a twinkle in his eye, said, but by God, please don't become a Republican until after I die.
Senator Utachek sits as an independent, the only one, but his view isn't unique. Women and men who feel they were forgotten turned this historically blue county red, making little-known Luzerne County into a national symbol of the discontent that contributed to Donald Trump's 2016 victory.
Joe Biden's been outsourcing your jobs.
Both candidates have been wooing Luzerne. Biden, who hails from Scranton in the county next door, held a drive-in rally last weekend.
It may come down to Pennsylvania.
And in Luzerne County, politics is a hot topic.
And he paid, from what I understand, at least $200,000 or $300,000 in China.
You're listening to fake news.
Fake news.
That
fake news.
I just go by the facts.
Senator Utachek is supporting Biden, but thinks Trump will win his coveted county.
Vice President Biden is valuing the voters, working class voters, here in Luzerne County in a way that Secretary Clinton did not. And if Joe Biden wins Pennsylvania, he'll be the next president of the United States.
That's what the Trump camp fears, and it's why he's holding a massive rally at the nearby airport Monday, the night before the election. Farah Nasser, Global News, Washington.
And that is Global National for this Thursday. I'm Robin Gill. Tonight, Your Canada is the Pumpkin Furno exhibit near Morrisburg, Ontario. Thank you for watching. Donna Friesen will be broadcasting from Washington tomorrow, and I'll see you on the weekend. Have a great night.